Yes. Well, Bo, so the question is, there's still some pent-up demand and people want to explore some of these more specific areas. You're going to have your cake and eat it too, I promise, because we will make sure that we will have a breakout, but we'll do it all in this room once we talk through and do our essentials of our gap analysis, talk about what's good and what are some of the barriers that somebody brought up today, and talk about what could be. The next step is to set up our initiatives, understand what those are, and they nest underneath some strategic focus areas that we've discussed around today, and those are essentially the breakout groups that we would be having. And so I tell people all the time to trust the process. And it's hard. In our company, we have a lot of people that are all PhD'd up. Sound familiar? I did a group of geoscientists earlier this year, 70 people that were in visioning session with 70 people. Geophysicists, reservoir engineers, and geologists, petrophysicists also. And, you know, right away when you get started and they start saying, Dan, how about this? Dan, how about that? And I do have fun with the trust the process comment. And trust the process. I always knock on wood. The sessions have been really good. I've done almost 70 visioning sessions in our company in the last 5 years. But it takes everybody. So our diversity of thought. And in the process tomorrow, what's going to happen is we talk about crowdsourcing. This is a service that we provide, our knowledge sharing team that I'm really proud of and our company provides to the rest of our company. And we've even expanded it out to some of our partners and universities. And it's an opportunity tomorrow to also learn that methodology. If you've never been through it, it's quite a simple, it's strikingly simple, the exercise, yet the results can be really an effective way in a short period of time to get a roadmap to build a 5-year plan. Sometimes I call it a 1,000-day plan because people say, I come back and I follow up on you. I'm always there. I'm saying, hey, how's that 5-year plan? And people say, oh, we got 5 years, you know, so we're not going to get started until next year. I'm like, what? I put a lot of energy into that session, so I start calling them 1,000-day plans. Some reason, 1,000 days, roughly 3 years, you can get more energy out of that. Believe it or not, it's funny how people are, but maybe some of you have experienced things like that. So my job here is to recap the day, and I'm going to need your help to do that. It's kind of like homework. You're making me do homework here. We started out listening to Mayor Healy, and the thing that I found striking in his discussion was related to what I was just talking about. And a lot of groups that come and have the courage to come forward and ask for these kind of transformational services like I'm talking about, you'll talk to them and you'll find out that everything they do is based on what they did yesterday. Is that good enough? And how can we engage people in a more purposeful way, purposeful collaboration? And you can use these kind of sections. And it seems like that's what he's done. He said, no, I'm not just going to be that guy that accepts things like they've always been in order to kind of go through it all and perhaps be reelected. He touched on that, but that was one thing that I found striking from him. Any other comments from Mayor Healy? I'm going to start calling on people, Stelter. He's changing the system. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. And so you end up with a nice success story as you go through that, forming, storming, norming, performing, resistance, et cetera, that we all have experienced. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to comment on his union shops that he was working with, and that some businesses we don't come in contact with union environments that much anymore, but in other parts of the country they're really dealing with how you relate to protecting employee rights and employee jobs, while at the same time as trying to modernize. And I thought there might be some learning there, especially with the focus of the center at the city and state level. There will potentially be learnings as to how to kind of modernize and bring knowledge management activities and concepts within a union environment, and not to lose that from his talk.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In our own company, which split mid last year, we had a lot of employees in the refining, all our employees in refineries around the world were unionized. And how that story about how I told earlier about how you can make it inclusive, their approach, which was effective, was exclusive, and we really never could crack the nut on encouraging the unions to get involved and having more people. So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, hey, I was going to trail into that, and taking it a little bit further is how do you drive knowledge sharing and collaboration in a capitalistic system? Capitalism is greed, and mine is better and competitiveness, right? Well,
shareholder value.
Living the more I know, the more I'm going to be able to make, kind of thing. But we're really trying to drive sharing and collaboration. It can be a double-edged sword, but it can also be a win-win, and being able to really drive for that win-win.
Sorry, I have to say. So here's the professor. Okay, financial capitalism is very different than intellectual capitalism. In fact, the basic models of capitalism work really, really well for intellectual capitalism because there's no such thing as scarcity. So we just have to think about intellectual capital differently. It's very abundant. We just need to figure out how to mobilize it. Sorry.
I was going to say one thing I learned from the mayor's approach this morning is don't be afraid to shame someone by putting their website up. As a change technique, but what I was really going to say is a little more philosophical, related to our last discussion. We had a little discussion, our panel, while the mics were off, about education in general and where we need to go with that. And in essence, what we realize is that we're still putting out students through K-12 that are prepared for the industrial age. And that what that really means is there's a lot of talk here about where industry is now and where the generations are now, and the problem of expertise leaving and needing to prepare the next generation to know the answer. What we have to be shooting for and address is that we're moving towards a knowledge economy, and the younger generations who go through and define education as knowing the answer, and only until master's or doctorate level start realizing it's not about the answer, we want to know your questions, we want to know your ideas, start to defend your hypothesis. Those types of techniques need to be pushed further down into, even into K-12, so that people are coming up with ideas, they know how to do that. And in that process, I think that one of the more philosophical things that they'll learn at a younger age is that there's no such thing as singularity without set. And I think people think too much about themselves and their own rights and their own wants without realizing that they're affecting the set in the house that they live in. And that's it's not just a statement about a company or a union or a country. It's just a philosophical idea that you can't escape. And I guess where I come from, just teaching the living organism of learning organizations, that it's a living thing that we live within. And I think when we start to address some of these bigger topics that we think we don't want to hit elementary school with, that I think they're ready for. I think that some of the kids that are asking questions, and it's not the question doesn't fit within the answer that the teacher's prepared to talk about are the first kids that we need to go put on Ritalin or something because they're not fitting into the system. And I think the kids are ready. I think that they're born looking for answers, wanting to be creative, learning is fun, ask big questions, and they're ready. We're the ones who have to adapt and adopt and be ready to address them where they are.
Yeah, good comment. I want to go ahead and skip forward to Dr. Honda and what he shared with us, the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company this morning. He shared a firsthand account of building a learning organization. And my own experience within corporate America, when I came in, I shared the story earlier today about how I joined as a consultant. One of the things I was very naive about was that I thought, well, this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to partner with the people in learning. I'm in charge of knowledge sharing, knowledge management. Man, we're going to get, I was ready to partner like nobody's business, but you know what they perceived was that there was this guy who was talking pretty well about this subject that was trying to come in and take over our territory. I'm like, what the heck? I'm just trying to, and it has been such a challenge to partner with our learning folks. I think now we're in a really good space, but a lot of years, I think, went by before we got to that point. The other thing that resonated with me, and we talked at lunchtime about this, I think most companies and organizations are a matrix organization in some form. And you talked about that cross-functional and the challenges associated with that cross-functional behavior and the collaboration. For us, our verticals are our business units around the world, and we're trying across our functions and disciplines, our global networks of individuals, to get that right behavior going so that we can learn and we can collaborate and put knowledge sharing, I call it, on the gossip train, because nothing moves faster than gossip. You want to get there with your knowledge sharing. What other comments resonated with you from Dr. Honda today when he talked? It was really thought-provoking. I thought it was. "100% reuse," yeah, good phrase.
One phrase I really liked was the diversity of innovative ideas.
Remember the blue card?
Collect and connect. Yes, we had a comment down here in front.
Mapping the processes, mapping the networks of employees, how they're engaging, the tools that they're using, the resources that they're accessing, really understanding how people within the organization, how they're working, and what resources they're using. That's so critical to go to that level.
And here's something that I think I would really want to emphasize, and it sort of really came home at the end of it. He talked about, kind of three value vectors, the innovative product, the speed to market, faster to market, and culture change. Or is everything they're doing, it doesn't matter what name you put on it, call it knowledge something, you don't have to. It's really all aligned to value, to business values, or, values of that enterprise. And that is so important because it's from the value back, and that, it gave the validation, the ability to measure these kinds of things were all being built into the various processes and experiments that they're trying.
Creating sustainability, yeah. Any other comments?
One of the things that I really enjoyed in his discussion was I'll call it interdisciplinary relationship. Not necessarily, but one of the things I've run across more often than not recently with clients is we'll get the smart CAM folks to hire us. When I go in there, guess what? It's not a CAM problem. It's a process problem. Now, they pay me big money. How do I convince them in a nice way that they get more lift from fixing process than KM than the other way around? So I got to satisfy them, at the same time want to deliver something that's really of value to them. And so when you talk about operations excellence, when you talk about project management, when you talk about lean, getting people to think in a broader terms and actually, like you say, partnering with them. Mm-hmm. Okay. We just talked with a major semiconductor manufacturer, who I can't name, but their name starts with an I.
Intel.
I didn't say that. They came to us for KM. And then I said, well, are you working with your Lean Six Sigma folks? They said, oh, what a great idea. So I think when I saw that, I've already asked Dean if I can steal that slide for use in the presentation. I'll make that formal request later.
That's a great point. We really respect our Lean Six Sigma folks as well, and we want to make sure that we nest under what they're trying to do, achieving business value and moving it forward. So.
Can I make one comment?
Yes.
We don't, if we start a KM initiative, it doesn't sustain. I was at Intel from 1984 to 1986. And, you know, almost everything I know about knowledge management, I learned at Intel from the culture. But that culture changed, right?
I just wanted to add my key takeaway. Any Kent State students, you know what a takeaway is? So my takeaway I really enjoyed from the presentation this morning was the idea that we understand the trade-offs that we're trying to solve for, but not surrender in thinking that you would never be able to solve for all of them. And that's a good point. We should consider that as we move forward on the strategy of the center on what the trade-offs are, and then not give up on thinking that we could not eventually solve for all of them.
The concept of unlearning as an educator, that just struck me and just wow, because we're always talking about helping people to learn, and to help people to unlearn is going to cause me to think a lot about what learning means, and so that was a real takeaway for me.
Next up, we heard from Mills and CEO of Project 10X. He talked to us about how knowledge equals theory and information that reduces uncertainty. For us, that knowledge information, I'm talking all day long about know how, know what, and know why, and how that gets into the mix, and how that does help in this continuum of decisions that we all make, all of our knowledge workers, in the course of a day, from discrete decisions that you've made 100 times. And I don't need help, but I know I need to use my own judgment when I get into a sophisticated decision where it's maybe more of an art than a science, and that know how, know what, know why of others needs to work its way into the mix. That combination of that and the explicit knowledge that's out there that I can get maybe through something that is juiced up semantically in an overall environment, you can imagine how that could be really effective. What other comments struck you? I know a term that I use all the time that I learned from a guy named Jim Leslie I used to work with at IBM. Aboutness was what he said, but you touched on it. He said it's all about what this stuff is about. That's what you want to discover. That's what people want to know. That's where they want to have a knowledge accident or create some intentional serendipity, because I see a category of stuff that I'm really interested in because it's very, very related to my daily job, that aboutness, and how can we bring that forward to our knowledge workers. What else struck you in Mills's? Yes, Madeline.
What struck me was the focus on cities. And I began to think about that in terms of the migration of our population across the globe toward urban settings. And although they are becoming enormous, they are in fact much smaller than nations. And it's because of the co-locality, you may actually have some potential there that you couldn't do any other place. Mm-hmm. It's a great recognition.
I have a question for Mills. What did you mean when you said we can't go back to Russia? So I think I know what you meant, but I don't want to misinterpret it. I think it's a juicy point.
Well, it's just one of my one-liners, but The point being that, you know, Russia was known for central planning, right? And most of what we've done with computer development was based on standalone, you know, computing things. And only gradually did they learn about network. Now we're in such an area where there's so many things and so many dynamic, you know, aspects of the network. There's no way to do it through central planning. You have to basically, you know, decentralize so that the individual elements themselves can kind of figure out what's going on. For example, if I want to have a service that, as you're walking down the street, based on the, you know, the activity awareness of your sensor device in your smartphone, you know, the screen on a building nearby you is going to produce a message that's relevant to you. You know, you don't solve that with centralized planning at design time. You solve that by the devices being able to negotiate and figure out what's going on and make decisions, you know, on the fly at that point. It's a different architectural approach. So the, you know, what you had with the Russian kind of model was a centralized planning that eventually collapsed because, you know, it didn't allow all of the centers, you know, in networks, value moves to, you know, the nodes, the intelligent moves to the nodes, but you still need to orchestrate and so on. But it's a different kind of model.
Yeah. Good.
I think one of the key takeaways for me in that whole presentation was the notion that you've kind of come down to the level of where is the knowledge, how do we identify it, and how do we apply it to deliver on the solution. This is the biggest nut that corporations are trying to crack out there. So we've collected all this stuff. We've got social media tools. We've got databases. We've got knowledge bases. We've got all these containers full of stuff. Where's the knowledge, right? How do we get at the knowledge? How do we make it actionable and usable? So to me, everything that you talked about the sort of semantic nature of the web and modeling and actually making sense out of all of that stuff is key.
But I also heard him, to build on that, talk about how that user experience needs to be simpler and smarter. So many times when you're so close to it, that you think that, oh, we have the greatest, you know, system and we have this and that and I can navigate it. Well, I'm the director of knowledge sharing. Of course I can navigate it. If I can't, there'd be a problem, right? Well, what is a new employee, an experienced hire, or somebody that's coming from a university campus? What are their perspectives of that user experience? They certainly, I think more and more, I call it the familiarity index. When they get into a company, they're expecting to be able to collaborate internally, but is it intuitive, as intuitive as it can be? You said something that was interesting. You keep it simple, and then behind the scenes, I forget exactly the phrase you used, but you have
a big honking knowledge model.
That's right. You got a big honking knowledge model, and I was thinking about, that's what Google does. So everybody asks me, Dan, what's all of this? Why can't we have Google? I'm thinking, holy smokes, if I had 2,000 people sitting just outside of my eye writing algorithms for me, I could have Google, or maybe 20,000, I don't know. It's tough, right? It's tough to have that big honking knowledge model.
I'd like to push back on that point just a bit, because the thing that struck me in the discussion was there still is a separation then between the user experience and the big honking knowledge model. And I wonder how far we could push to actually give the user some access to that knowledge model. If we had that access, then not only would they search and would they find, but they would also learn along the way. They might even want to edit and change and add some additional content to those knowledge models. So I was 100% on board with everything you said, and I wanted to hear that extra piece, so we'll talk offline about it. You know, to the point about Google, I mean, Google's implemented their knowledge graph at this point, and right now what it is, you still have the very easy-to-use Google interface, and then you get the knowledge graph results. You don't have any sense of why Google's telling you that these things are related. Yeah. Right, and so maybe down the line we can get some access to those big honking knowledge models. BHKM.
Couple more comments.
Okay. Not all the quote-unquote knowledge available on the internet is true. And for the academics grad, teaching critical thinking, I think, is going to be critical so that people can discern knowledge that is accurate, or even if all the knowledge is accurate, what applies in their context. I've seen a lot of business decision makers say, well, company XYZ did this and they had a great success, so we're going to do that too. And yet the context is totally separate, totally different, and so it's not going to work.
Something that struck me during Mill's presentation, I'm very familiar with research that my daughter has done with regards to robotics and the singularity of robotics. For those who don't know, that means when a robot becomes as smart as a human. And during the presentation, I started to think, are we moving towards a computing singularity? Are we moving towards a place where we need to be looking at new technologies such as virtual reality or artificial intelligence as they relate to KM? So that is the takeaway that I got from it.
And in fact, if you look at where KM started, it's in the field of economics and AI and learning. Yep.
Well, following lunch and an extended networking break, Denise brought us back to the foundation. What are some of the key elements associated with developing the Knowledge Sciences Center? You know, how do we expect the stakeholders, academia, the business, civil society, et cetera, to come together to help form the ideas and bring out what the portfolio of services, et cetera, might be for the center. And then we had a series of panel discussions that we talked about with Bo led a discussion with the business community, the technology community from Gus, Madeline, civil society workforce, and then we closed out with Holly and the academic community. Any comments from folks following up on any of those panel discussions or concepts around the build out of the center as we close out today? Yes.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of go back to something I tried to introduce earlier. I see the future, the Knowledge Science Center and the future waves of change. We're basically in a techno-social economic collaboration or co-evolution. And the thing that I took away from this afternoon was that one, you know, I think there's some very strong and well thought out, you know, positions that people have. The challenge we all face is to have a larger synthesis and one that also, I think, we think it through in terms of where the areas of value are, where's the areas of impact that, you know, can be had from a knowledge center through, you know, its various activities and, you know, its collaborators. So that, you know, that for me was, again, what we have now that we didn't have before is a technology of knowledge. What we have is a lot of experience on the, you know, knowledge management, looking more organizational people side of it. And what we have is a lot of other trends and driving forces that are forcing the world kicking and screaming, you know, to move in these new kinds of directions that are absolutely desirable. And that was part of the reason for bringing up the intelligent cities as a potential focal point, you know, for having impact. So in that, you know, I'm hoping tomorrow, you know, that we're going to be able to really get down to, as you say, get down to business and start to really focus in on a model that, you know, that we can usually drive forward with.
Yeah, you talked about, who was it that had that quote, and what was the rest of the quote? It started out with, the future is today, or today, we are in the future. Bill Gibson talked about that, and there was a final piece of his quote. It's just not widely distributed, and I think that feeds into what it is you're talking about. It's funny, when I got into knowledge management back in the mid to late 90s at Ernst & Young, Mike Stelter actually was my boss, and I worked with Jim Lee. And in my first, I remember thinking, I was at the Center for Business Knowledge for Ernst & Young. We were really good, you know, and we had this, we thought we were the best and that kind of thing. And I thought, man, this is stuff that my first thought was, it was so intuitive, as I was telling you during the break. I'm going to have to think of some other career in the next 2 or 3 years because, you know, everyone's going to be doing knowledge management like nobody's business, and it's going to be all done. It's going to be all smoothed out. I could not have been more wrong. I remember coming home and telling my wife, honey, this is a great job, but I'm going to have to learn something else. Here it is, almost 20 years later, and we're still talking about all of these concepts in the context of what you just said, Mills, for example, I think, and I move around and I talk with a lot of groups, this area is hotter and more important than ever in all the contexts that we're talking about. So I think it is carpe diem time for this prospective center. It's my own viewpoint. Yes?
I'll express a concern. We have lots of great ideas here, and we'll want to promote them. And we have some very old and hideous models of distance learning, which I'm afraid we'll put onto this, and it'll all collapse. And I urge us, as someone who has been in distance learning, as an educator for over 20 years, to apply knowledge management precepts to distance learning models, or this whole thing will fall of its own weight. People can't collaborate with the traditional kind of distance learning that, frankly, higher education is depending on more and more to promote what it does, including, I'm sorry to say, our own knowledge management program at Kent State. And we need to move beyond that if we're going to be successful.
We would like all of you technology. Well, one of the ideas that came up in the webinars, and I don't know if any of you have had a chance to listen to this, but the links are all online. There's some really good discussions about it. But one of the issues that was raised, an activity for the center, was to work with the technology industry to come up with new models that would support all of the things that we want to do. So let's be a place where the different companies can come in and we can tell them what we want to do, and they can make suggestions. We can take their products, kick the tires around, and I shouldn't say that. There goes my professorship. Come up with a new model, because right now it's just coming out of the academic world. The developers are just taking what we do today and automating it, not thinking of something even new.
Comment on what you just said. Coming out of this, when we as a company did what we did, it would have been nice to have someone who had been through it, to have that knowledge of what we weren't considering while we were putting together our statement of work and our customization documents, our needs assessments, all of those things, or even building our taxonomy. It would have been absolutely great to have a partner who could tell us what we were missing.
One final comment. The internet can probably not hear you. I'm just going to speculate without a microphone.
Yeah, I think my question as a small business representative is whether or not this is being perceived as something that will be done on behalf of, or will it be a paying model, pay-as-you-go type thing. I'm thinking the models of SCORE, as I mentioned to that gentleman, the SBA, CDC, and other things. There are so many rich opportunities out there, and there are so many consultants in this room that I would love to pick the brains of, but I can't afford the first 10 minutes, let alone a solution. And so as long as that model continues, we will always be closing the door to some of the neediness. And it's a different form of haves and have-nots, but it really is quite similar in our own culture. There are plenty of people that have the opportunity, the idea, the initiative, the drive, but they lack the resources. And there are just as many people, like many of you sitting in this room, who have to feed your own family. And so you're doing it, obviously, for profit. And if the center can't reconcile those two unique needs, at least in terms of small business, I would argue it will fail. And I hate to use that word. Maybe it's the only time it was said today. Yeah. But I think it's true.
Yeah.
A quick follow-up on what you're saying. There's two sides to that same coin. There's a lot of people out there
who have good ideas, good methods, good help to offer, but can't find a venue for it. There are, anyone in here who has put out their own shingle, their own consulting service, doesn't have a good credit rating. Those don't go together. I mean, this is not a program with a safety net. This is not an industry with a safety net. Anybody who, my hat's off in full admiration to anyone who's gone out there and fought the fight and stayed alive so that they could help their customers, because it's a very hard road to do. The center can help them too, and the center can help those who can contribute to the profession but haven't had an avenue to do so. So I think there are three major stakeholder communities there that I think we've talked about. They're the have-not researchers, the have-not consumers, and the have-not providers, who all need a way, an avenue, a vehicle that this center, I hope, could provide.
Well, Denise, why don't we let that be, if you're comfortable, and everyone else is, the final comment as we close out today, a day rich in presentations, panel discussions, audience interaction, as we built a foundation for the visioning session tomorrow. And if you go to bed early tonight and you get up early tomorrow morning, I will promise you a great, through diversity of thought, all of our thoughts, visioning session tomorrow. So please come back and be ready to think, interact, and share your ideas, and we'll build a roadmap for the next 5 years, and we'll get it done by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you.